listeners are going to be fascinated by our next guest, Mark Adamczyk. He is a lawyer in South Florida, just right across the state from where we are. And like myself, he is a self-described expert on John Fitzgerald Kennedy's assassination. Now, Mark, you don't know this unless you've been listening to The Truth. Maybe you have. But we have been talking about JFK's assassination virtually nonstop for the last 3 years while we've been doing this program. And the purpose is not to, a benefit, hopefully, is that we'll convince enough people that Lee Harvey Oswald did not act alone and dispel the lone gun theory, but really to expose the corrupt federal government that has maintained this false narrative for the last 65 years. So, Mark, welcome to The Truth.
Yeah, thanks, John. Thanks for having me. Excited to talk about this with you.
So how did you acquire an interest in JFK's assassination?
Well, I was born in the Boston area. My parents talked about the Kennedys a lot. I would say when it really started, we had moved to Florida, and then I ended up going to school for college at Tulane in New Orleans. And when I was supposed to be studying on my, in the business school or whatever, I would sneak over to the Tulane library and read all of the original newspaper clippings from the local paper that covered the Garrison investigation and the trial of Clay Shaw. And I came to learn that a lot of the activities that led up to the assassination in New Orleans were important. And they also, they involved Lee Harvey Oswald. So we can get into that if you'd like. And then, like most Americans, or worldwide, I should say, was fascinated by Oliver Stone's JFK film in 1991. And it's hard to believe, but it's true that that movie had such an impact on the public. At the very end of the movie, in the scroll, it announced the fact, and it was very much a fact at the time, that the files on the Kennedy assassination would be locked away until the year 2029. And that outraged most folks who saw the movie, and it led to action in Congress the next year. Congress unanimously passed the JFK Records Collection Act, which we now see is still very much relevant in the news. We can get into that if you'd like. And so, then I just started reading as many books as I could about the case, both pro-conspiracy and pro-Warren Commission, just to learn as much as I could. And then I became an expert in that law that I mentioned in 2017, when Trump had the opportunity to release the records as mandated by that law. It did not happen, so I wanted to understand why. Biden then issued his transparency plans, they were called, that made the problem worse. And here we are.
Well, Trump didn't do it because Mike Pompeo talked him out of it. Trump was prepared to do it. He actually is one of the very few promises he made in the 2016 campaign that he did not keep. And I love President Trump. There are never Trumpers, and I am a forever Trumper, unless he disappoints, which I don't think he will. But that was one thing that I wish he had not done, i.e. listen to Mike Pompeo. So you want to tell us what your theory of the case is?
Yeah, we could get right to that. So to me, the fascination, look, I just want to make one comment on Trump's action in 2017. What really happened, and not many people know this, is that it was public at the 11th hour. He said that week in October of 2017, he was excited to release the records, and he was going to do it. I fully believe he intended to do it.
Yeah.
So not only did he get last-minute visits from the CIA, Pompeo, and the like, and other agencies probably, telling him it was a terrible idea, he would endanger the country, etc. But that was at the last minute. He also got, whether he read it or not, but we discovered it, there's a legal memo from the Office of Legal Counsel from the DOJ that completely manipulated how the JFK Records Act was supposed to work. It advised the president at the time that he could issue a blanket, wide-sweeping delay and not have to disclose the reasons for postponement, and that's not what the law said. So if you take that, you got that memo at the 11th hour, legal advice, so to speak, which was faulty, combined with the pressure from agencies, you can understand why it was why he did what he did. But I think now, having had a few years to understand it better and probably get better education on it, I think he wants to make some progress on this.
Well, and we were just talking with a guest that we had on prior to you that my belief, my impression was that Trump was trying to play nice with insider Washington, and he was not trying to go and disrupt, and he wanted to win those people over, and so he was trying to placate them on a lot of things. And after they turned on him in the 2020 election and stole the election from him, my considered belief on good authority, I've seen the evidence in Georgia. There's no question that Georgia was absolutely stolen. There was so much fraud. Two numbers guys independently have concluded that 400,000 illegal votes existed just in Georgia. We digress. The point is that he was like me. He was bitter. He was angry. He wanted to get the record straight. Well, now in Trump 47, there is no Mr. Nice Guy. You're either with him or you're against him, and you're either a law follower or you're a lawbreaker. And if you're the latter, there's no room for you in the Trump administration. Kudos, Mr. President. Keep it up. So, but I didn't hear in all of that what your theory of the case is.
Sure. So to me, the key to the case is understanding the period between August of 1963 and, of course, Dallas in November of 63. All right, because there was an unusually high level of activity starting in New Orleans with Oswald regarding the Cuba problem, right? That was an obsession with the Joint Chiefs and the CIA and the anti-Castro Cubans since the Bay of Pigs. Kennedy did not invade Cuba after the Bay of Pigs failed invasion. He did not invade Cuba after the missile crisis in 62. So 63 was a huge deal to finally get something done. You may have heard of Operation Northwoods. This was discovered by the Records Review Board in the late 90s when it was finishing its work on reviewing the records to follow out that statute. And Northwoods was a scheme, Pentagon-sponsored scheme to stage a spectacular event on U.S. soil and immediately be able to have pretext to blame Cuba and Castro. All right. If you look at what happened on November 22nd, 1963, it has all the blueprints. So how do you get there? You go back to New Orleans in August. Oswald had been there since April of 63 on various assignments and activities, all related to Cuba. If you watch the movie that I mentioned, JFK, you'll see it dramatized. His office and his hangout at 544 Camp Street in New Orleans it's all been verified by witnesses. And that was a hotbed of anti-Castro activity. But what was Oswald doing there publicly? He was being portrayed as a pro-Castro communist, leading a one-member chapter of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. So we now know from release of records about Operation Inspel, a CIA operation to infiltrate the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. They wanted to know about it, how it was run, who they could get to discredit and destroy it as a support of Castro. So Oswald was in the middle of all that. He was passing out the leaflets about the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, but the key is the interaction he had in New Orleans was with the DRE, a Cuban student organization that was the most active in the CIA operations at the time. All right, so they had the staged altercation with him. He went to prison. Guess what he did in prison, by the way? I shouldn't say prison, city jail in New Orleans after his public arrest, he got to meet with the FBI for several hours. I mean, what kind of low-level, lone nut, crazy, nobody gets to meet with the FBI after a minor scuffle in the streets in New Orleans? So that also is very relevant about his other activities and assignments. But when he became public in New Orleans on the radio and television as a Castro supporter, and that was all in interaction with the CIA-sponsored AMSPEL operation with the DRE that I mentioned, he left New Orleans as essentially the perfect patsy already for Dallas. Now, can I say that that was part of the assassination plan, or was it just to infiltrate this Cuban organization? We know they succeeded on the infiltration part, the counterintelligence part, but it certainly put him in the right public view for what happened in Dallas. Then you go to Mexico City the following month. Oswald was clearly impersonated in Mexico City in a CIA-sponsored operation. The CIA station in Mexico City knew that the photographs they had of someone who was allegedly Oswald wasn't him. They asked headquarters for other photos to verify, and headquarters ignored the problem. He was also further portrayed there as being prone to assassination, having allegedly met with an assassination specialist linked to the KGB in the Soviet embassy. So that's a whole nother show we could have on Mexico City, and there's still a lot of mystery surrounding it, but we do know that he left Mexico City and went back to Dallas, so the acceleration of the creation of his legend as a patsy was complete, right? So then on November 22nd, he's in the perfect place at the perfect time to assassinate the president, supposedly. And then what happened? We can get into the details of the case and the shooting and all that, but we know he was in the right place at the right time. He was not on the 6th floor of the depository. That's inescapably proved in our book, JFK Assassination Chokeholds, but he was in the building. So what happened?
Well, he was in the break room. He was seen there at 5 minutes before, 10 minutes before the assassination, and he was seen there very shortly after the assassination, sitting in the same seat, drinking the same Coca-Cola, that the police officer rushed through the break room and asked the manager who was in trail, who is that? And he said, oh, he works here. That's all the attention they paid him. Then they rushed upstairs to the sniper's nest.
Right. Yeah, well, there's witnesses on the stairs that never saw him and he couldn't get down. Right, it was the only route of exit. So he was not on the 6th floor. And but what did happen, we know we follow his tracks after that and talk about Tippit and where he was arrested. But the key to understanding what I think happened is within hours of Oswald's arrest, as the suspect in the case, all of the information known about Oswald from New Orleans went worldwide. His radio and TV interviews as being a pro-Castro communist, and that was the immediate propaganda put out there. Where did that come from? The same CIA-sponsored group in New Orleans that had the interactions with Oswald. They could not wait to release this information based on what happened in Dealey Plaza. So that's where you come back to that Northwoods blueprint. It happened, the most spectacular event you could imagine, tragic, and immediately Cuba was blamed. The problem is that Oswald survived November 22nd, and that was not part of the plan.
Oh, you think that Oswald was not supposed to die?
No. I mean, I think he was supposed to be eliminated shortly after the assassination, yeah. Because then he gets arrested, starts asking for a lawyer. What did he say? I'm just a patsy.
I'm a patsy, sure.
Yeah. If you listen to those words, they really matter. He didn't say, I really don't know anything. I wasn't involved in anything. He knew he was involved in something that led to his setup, but he said he was patsy, and that was a huge problem for the plotters.
So David Talbot, of California author, has written The Devil's Chessboard. We interviewed him on our show 3 years ago. He concluded that the CIA killed Kennedy, that Allen Dulles hated Kennedy Kennedy fired him from the CIA, yet Dulles continued to operate as if he were still the director from his Georgetown townhouse, and that senior management from the CIA would come and visit with him in his townhouse, and that when Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Dulles was in the CIA command center, some secret place that they've got in Virginia, I believe, observing and choreographing or overseeing the entire operation. I believe that story. Now, Roger Stone has written a book, The Men Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ. He thinks that LBJ orchestrated it. I think that the evidence that Roger Stone has developed and the evidence that David Talbot says in his book are not inconsistent with the other. It is perfectly agreeable to me to conclude that they both had a hand in it. Maybe Dulles was in the operational command, but Johnson clearly, I believe, knew about it because he came out of a meeting in Fort Worth the night before and greeted his then mistress, who I have watched on YouTube. You can go Google LBJ's mistress, and she says, and you can evaluate her for yourself for her credibility, that Johnson came out of this room where he met with a bunch of high-powered Texas oil men, and that he was visibly agitated and red-faced, and said, after tomorrow, those SOBs will never embarrass me again. Then we also had another guy who came on the truth, two people actually, who were in Houston the day before and had wanted to see the motorcade and had run down to the motorcade and missed it. So they went to this dinner club afterwards, and the manager of the dinner club came over and said, "Hey, I'm out of seats. Would you mind if these two guys come and sit with you?" Well, they said, "Well, I mean, I don't. If you need us to, I guess." And he said, "Well, they're members of the Secret Service. They were here guarding the president today, and I'd really like to accommodate them." And they said, "Oh, the Secret Service, sure, bring them on over." So they had a couple of cocktails together. I spoke to this guy, and he said that the Secret Service agent, that he said he was sorry that he didn't see the motorcade go by, and he said, and the Secret Service agent said, and this is implausible to me, said, "Well, good that you missed the motorcade today in Houston, and that you're not going to be in Dallas tomorrow because Kennedy's going to be assassinated." So I didn't believe the story. I said, "Well, who were you with?" And he gave me the guy's name and phone number, and I called him, and he told me virtually the identical story and corroborated it. And so that, I think that there was a plan. There were also reports that Kennedy was supposed to be shot in Chicago. There's a lot of evidence about that, and then it was going to be Miami. One other little tidbit, and then I'll let you talk. I'm sorry, this subject fires me up. But there was a guy in Miami, and I think it was like 1982, somewhere in there, that told his sons that he didn't have long to live. And they said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "Well, I've talked too much, and they're going to kill me." And he said, "Well," they said, "Well, Dad, tell us your life story." And he said that he was a trained CIA assassin, that he was at a CIA camp for assassins, and that Lee Harvey Oswald was there, but that he didn't know why Oswald was there, didn't really get to know him, but that after Dallas he recognized the picture and understood why he was there. Well, it wasn't but within a month that guy was taken out in a bar in Miami. So then you got E. Howard Hunt, the famed Watergate burglar, who made a deathbed confession to his son, St. John Hunt, that he had actually been in Dealey Plaza on November the 22nd and was part of the CIA cleanup team. Now, nobody disputes that E. Howard Hunt was part of the CIA, and I've listened to the deathbed confession several times. He is I don't know, he was old and he was dying, and the way he talked gave me pause. He sounded a little bit off his rocker, but then when you take it into the context of what happened, it sounds very credible and very believable to me. So, Mark, I ask you your theory of the case. My theory is the CIA orchestrated it, they carried it out, that Johnson and Hoover covered it up, and that the mainstream media has been complicit in covering it up for 65 years. And I'll tell you, that guy that worked for Fox, who got fired along with Tucker, he had the #1 show. Tucker replaced him. What's his name? I'm drawing a blank.
I'm not sure.
It'll come to me in a second. But he wrote a book, and he concluded that Oswald acted alone. And when he did that, I just said, "You're part of the deep state."
Bill O'Reilly.
Bill O'Reilly. Thank you very much. I'm old too.
That's the thing. I mean, the books that sell the most are the ones that promote the lone assassin. Oswald did it. The movies, I mean, with the exception of the Oliver Stone movie, they get the most attention, the most sales, don't they?
Well, we're about to find out, and the lady congresswoman who's heading the committee that has been appointed to orchestrate the release of all the files. I read an interview with her this morning. She said that she's seen the documents, that there were 2 shooters in Dallas, and that the files are going to come out, and that she's going to try and push them out with as little redaction as absolutely possible. So I think we're about to find out. I've waited 65 years for the truth. I can't wait.
Yeah, I wrote a letter to her today. In fact, just sent it from my office, offering assistance with that task force, because it's critical that her team and the oversight committee have a clear understanding of how the records collection law is supposed to work and how it's been mishandled and abused since the 90s.
Well, and Tucker Carlson interviewed or spoke to a lady who works in the National Archives, and she said she had seen the files and that that the CIA was unquestionably involved. So I don't hate on the CIA. I hate on the people that did it, and I don't indict everybody who works for the CIA as a assassin of the most popularly elected president up until that time, and absolutely thwarted the will of the American people and our democratic process. But I believe there needs to be accountability at all levels. And I think that we should try these people in memoriam, and we should rip their names off the buildings that we have mistakenly honored them with, and the street signs, and wherever else we can find them, because it was the lowest act of any government, any action of our government that I'm aware of.
Yeah. Well, the more time that goes by, going back to your conclusion, I don't disagree, but the more time that goes by, you can't get away from the cover-up. I mean, the Warren Commission from day one, the CIA from day one lied to the Warren Commission. They knew all about Oswald going back to 1959 with his fake defection to Russia, and then lied to the Warren Commission immediately after the assassination, saying they didn't really know much about this guy. It's all been a lie. So the more time goes by, I think, you're not going to have a record that proves any of those stories that you mentioned, although they're all fascinating. There could be some truth to a lot of them. But I think if you focus on Oswald, Mexico City, and those CIA-sponsored operations and that had direct links, there's 6 of them. Now, there's 6 CIA operations that touched Oswald up until Dallas. So then you got to connect, that last month. Okay, he's there. You have the assassination programs that have been going on for years out of JM Wave, the CIA station in Miami. And they had Oswald hand-delivered to them as the patsy in Dallas. All they had to do was carry out the crossfire.
Yeah. So there are 2 things that occurred in that Oswald was connected with that I have not been able to unravel. One is I have not read nor spoken with anybody who disputes that Oswald took a shot at retired General Edwin Walker. I guess it was maybe weeks or a month before the Kennedy assassination. Do you have any insight or take on that?
I think it's more likely that he did that. I mean, we know he didn't kill Kennedy, and I don't believe he even fired a shot in Dallas that day. That was a long time before November 22nd, 1963. It was when he first returned, from Russia and settled back in Fort Worth, Dallas in '62, and so that was much earlier in '63. And again, he had ordered or supposedly ordered the rifle from Chicago under his alias, and it's just a mess. I mean, that if anything, it shows that he was prone to doing something crazy like that. But there's not enough on that to tie it to November 22nd. But it's out there, yeah.
Well, similarly, I've never been able to really unravel or satisfy my own curiosity surrounding Officer J.D. Tippit. There were eyewitnesses who saw Oswald kill Tippit, allegedly, and he then ran down the street past a shoe store where a guy saw him running in the white T-shirt, and I don't know whether he spotted the gun or not, but saw him dart into the theater, and he's the one who supposedly called the cops and said that there was a suspicious person in the theater, and that's when the police went to the theater in Dallas and arrested Oswald. Any theories or thoughts on J.D. Tippit?
Yeah, the Tippit case has not been solved. The timing from when Oswald left his rooming house just after 1 p.m. to the now known timing thereabouts of when Tippit was shot was not enough time for Oswald to cover that distance by foot. I mean, I've walked it at a brisk pace, and you just can't do it.
To cover which distance now?
The distance from his rooming house where he went after Dealey Plaza, right? And he went in, he did get his revolver, and he left after a few minutes, and then the next thing he's in the theater. But supposedly, according to the Warren Commission, he had time to walk almost a mile the other direction, kill Tippit, walk to the theater, and that's where he was arrested. It doesn't add up. The folks that didn't make our book Chokeholds because it doesn't get to the level of proof we're looking for. But the weird part about the Tippit case, and this is where you can get back to the fact that Oswald was set up and he was an intelligence low-level asset. His wallet, he had 2 wallets on him that day. One was found at the Tippit scene, and an identical wallet he had with him in his possession when arrested at the Texas Theater. I mean, who has 2 wallets?
Yeah.
And, so that's a problem. And
well,
yeah.
I've also read, and you alluded to it, that there was an Oswald lookalike, and there are a lot of scholars who believe that there was a person that looked like Lee Harvey Oswald, and that there is a suspicion that he was in the balcony of the theater. Maybe he was the one who killed Tippit and ran down the street and got in the balcony, but it still doesn't really explain how Oswald ended up in the theater. Maybe he was told to meet somebody there or something. I don't know. That's where I haven't been able to connect those dots. I think that the real, if we want some very conclusive proof, we don't know what's going to come out in the documents. I think that I actually believe that the proof will be there. But there is one living person that I think could shed tremendous light on this if we could administer sodium pentothal to her. Her name is Ruth Payne, and she housed Oswald when he came to Dallas. Gave him, he and his wife, a place to live for some number of months, and I have read that she is the one who got Oswald the job at the school book depository. Well, she also had a relationship with George de Mohrenschildt, who was a known CIA operative and is believed to have been Lee Harvey Oswald's handler. He had an interview at the Breakers Hotel I guess it's probably 20 or 30 years ago now, with a journalist. They broke for lunch, and he drove back to where he was staying in right down the street here from where I live, just south of Palm Beach. He was in the guest room the burglar alarm went chirp, chirp, and then there was a gunshot, and George DeMorenshield was found dead just 10 miles from where I'm sitting, and it was ruled a suicide. He was supposed to go back to the Breakers Hotel that afternoon and complete the interview. He didn't make it. Ruth Payne can tell us about George DeMorenshield. She lives in California to this day. She's 92 years old. I would like to see an investigation reopened on some level, and for Ruth Payne to be called, and I think she could help us unravel this spaghetti, frankly.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, listen, the Warren Commission's mandate was not to solve the case and find any other conclusion other than Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone gunman with no conspirators. So that's why, it was Ruth Payne's story that she was a good Samaritan, welcomed in Marina, who was on her own with kids. She taught her Russian. They had a nice little, friendly relationship. They could live together. They weren't with their husbands, etc. That's all nonsense. If you look at, like you said, her connections and her husband's connections to the CIA and intelligence, and her garage, starting with the afternoon of of November 22nd and in the following days, became a treasure trove of evidence against Oswald. The backyard photos, the empty rifle sack, and the camera and those types of things. So no, I think it's remarkable that she's alive and hasn't been further investigated on this. But that's where we're at. The any of those types of things. The House Select Committee on Assassinations. You mentioned DeMorenshield. His apparent suicide took place when that investigation was heating up in the late 70s. That congressional body could have solved the case easily then. It was only 15 years after. They were determined to do it. That investigation was also infiltrated by the CIA. And then they concluded that there was a probable conspiracy, but that Oswald was still responsible, and it was recommended that the Department of Justice investigate further, and nothing was done. Nothing really happened in the 80s. Then the movie came out, and then the Records Act came out, and now we are 30 years after that, still arguing over the secrecy of these records. And the only legal basis for withholding a record in 2025 is if there's a living person or a source or method, intelligence source or method, that still could be compromised by the information in these records. It's just laughable to think that. So it's more of a cover-up of what happened with the agencies we've been talking about 60 years ago. And all comes back to what they knew about Oswald, who he really was, and his role on November 22nd. And then that was immediately covered up by LBJ and Hoover that weekend, as you know.
Well, and Richard Nixon got into a contentious conversation with Richard Helms, the head of the CIA, in the Oval Office when Nixon was president, after he had been elected by a huge popular majority. And so they got into a riff, and Nixon told Richard Helms that, and when it got heated, he said, "Well, I think I know who killed Jack." Well, 6 months later, Nixon was standing for impeachment. If you accept the premise of the CIA killed Kennedy, I believe the story about Richard Helms and Nixon is true. I'm willing to be open to that possibility, and and then Trump. I believe it was JFK 2.0 that he was politically assassinated in 2020. They stole this election. I don't think you could have done that without the help of the deep state, again, the intelligence community. There's a lot of evidence about Obama having developed software programs to help tinker with elections in foreign countries. There are strong beliefs that software was used in the 2020 election and I've seen the CISA data where Trump's votes were actually decremented at 12 and 1 o'clock in the morning, and Biden's were increased. And so I want the JFK story to be told truthfully so that we can shock the American people into reality. And I don't want to do away with the CIA and the good men and women who are actually there to protect us every day and putting their lives on the line, but I want it to be radically reformed. And for everyone that works for the federal government to be working for the American people. And it's just gotten corrupt. And I think it started in 1963 when you could literally get away with murder if you work for the government. And then you could do whatever you wanted to. I call it trickle-down ethics. You see these things happening, and every bureaucrat in America said, well, if they can kill the duly elected president of the United States, I can go screw over my enemy or political opponent or somebody I don't like, and I can get away with it. And I think it's been going on for 65 years. I think it's still going on. I think Trump realizes it too.
I agree. The CIA it was supposed to be an intelligence gathering agency for the office of the president set up by Truman. What it became was an assassination machine in the 50s. You mentioned Nixon. When he was vice president, he was heavily involved in overseeing the creation of that assassination machine. And like you said, Nixon wanted to know all about that, more about Dallas when he was running for re-election in 72. Because he was paranoid, as he was prone to be, that it would come out that he was indirectly responsible for setting up this machine in the 50s when he was VP, that it was responsible for Dallas, and that's the short of it. But yeah, it's
well, Truman wrote Kennedy a letter and said that the agency that he created had gotten off the rails and needed to be reined in. Eisenhower went to Kennedy and told him that he thought the CIA was out of control. And so Kennedy said, 6 months before he was assassinated, I'm going to bust the CIA into 1,000 pieces and spread its parts from the Pacific to the Atlantic. And my belief is that they got him before he got them.
Well, he got in the way of their foreign policy objectives because we talked about Cuba and his refusal to go along with that. And immediately after his assassination, Johnson escalated Vietnam as well. So,
well, let's make a date to have you back on after the files get released, and we can do a debrief, and we can see which of our theories were correct and which of them we were off base on. You and I are in complete harmony in how we see it, but you are the author of a scholarly work, Chokeholds, correct? And that is the subject of the JFK assassination. Where do we find the book, and how was it done?
Yeah, it's a great book because it holds anything we talk about is in the book is held to a very high standard of evidence. So there's no speculation, anything we didn't think that was an undeniable truth right now. Such as that we talked about Oswald on the 6th floor, the autopsy, the frontal shot that clearly proved there is more than one shooter from the front, and other parts of the case. So in the last chapter is awesome. It talks about the 60 years of obstruction of justice in this case, which we've touched on today. So it's on Amazon. There's an Audible version too. I really encourage the listeners to follow us on Twitter at JFK Chokeholds, because myself and our co-authors are releasing all kinds of information every day, not only pertaining to the records, but other shows and things that they really need to listen to that they may not easily find.
Oh my gosh, Mark, you're nurturing my obsession now. You've given me more homework to do. My wife is going to be really mad at you for telling us this. Another great book on the assassination that I read that I think is really spot on is The Unspeakable by Douglas. And Robert Kennedy Jr. Has mentioned that book several times. And so I'm just excited about the revelations that are coming. And my hope and prayer is that it will help shock the American people, I'll say it again, into reality, and for them to realize they cannot just take what the federal government spoon feeds us, and that they've got to put their own intellectual energy into determining what the truth is, and we all as a nation have to stand. I've said to everybody that's come onto the program of national prominence, people that have the ability to make a difference, that we need to join hands and all agree, Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives. I just had this conversation with Eric Metaskis, who is an opinion leader and has written a book, Is Atheism Dead? And I said, look, why doesn't every living American put their ideology and their bias and their selfishness aside, and we just all agree that the truth is going to guide all of our decision making? And that's and it happens to be the name of our show. I just want the truth, and I want us to follow the truth wherever it leads, and that should be the basis for our decisions.
Well said, John. Well, hopefully, there's going to be a phased approach, I think, with these records. I think Trump's first order is a great start. The key will be not letting it fall back into the hands of the same agencies that have fiercely protected these records and the secrecy for 60 years now. So if the right people get involved, congressional oversight is active, there's going to be some progress on this.
Good. Well, I hope we do see it, and I hope that they don't revert to the norm. With you on the case and others, well, and Robert Kennedy Jr. in the administration and a member of cabinet, I think he's going to keep the embers stoked, and that he will help get it. And I believe that Trump is fully committed to doing it, and I think Kash Patel will probably help us get to the truth as well. So, Mark, thank you for coming on. I'm going to go get Chokehold. I'm going to listen to it on Audible. I'm glad you added that, and I'm going to go to the JFK Chokeholds. Is that .com or is it on X? Where do we find it?
JFKchokeholds.com is our website. You can see the book, but that's our same handle on X, Twitter, and that's really where you want to go right now, because our authors are putting in all kinds of updates from Congress people to our own thoughts and the interviews that we do that just keep people really up to date. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mark. And if you find yourself on the east coast of Florida, please look me up, give me a call, sure, and we'll settle all these questions over adult beverage with some suds on top of it, or I don't know, maybe clear liquid, whatever your preference is.
I'll take you up on that. I do get over there here and there, so we'll do it.
Well, I'd love to meet you in person. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming on The Truth.